We do have a quorum, but we are still waiting for a couple more people to join us. I've moved everyone over who's joined so far, though.
Okay, well, let's get going with roll call, and I'm sure people will trickle in.
Okay. Town of Ashland, Miss Amos. I believe we have Miss Amos with us. I'll circle back and double check after the roll. Charles City County, Miss Adams. Mr. Mitchell. Chesterfield County, Chair Smith.
Here,
Miss Walker. Goochland County, Mr. Goyne.
Here.
Mr. Coleman. Hanover County, Mr. Vidunez. Mr. Hardman. Henrico County, Mr. Ure. Miss Smidler.
Here.
New Kent County, Miss Inman.
Present. Thank you.
Powhatan County, Mr. Shardine. City of Richmond, Miss Clark. GRTC, Mr. Adarqua. Miss Robinson.
Here.
Thank you. CVTA, Mr. Parsons.
Here.
Plan RVA, Mr. Bushing.
Here.
DRPT, Ms. Dubinsky. Mr. Hudson. VDOT, Mr. Totten. Mr. Riblet.
Here.
Miss McAdory. RMTA, Miss Dean. And Virginia Port Authority, Miss Nelson.
Here.
Thank you. That concludes the roll call for attendance. We do have a quorum, and again, I'll circle back and see who may have joined while we were calling the roll.
okay, yeah, there's in the chat, Jerona is present. Chessa was
Mr.
having
Vinsky
trouble
joined us.
joining.
Okay.
Let's see.
I see we have Miss Dubinsky and Miss Clark that I'll add to the attendance. Miss Amos is here, though I'm not sure why she was unable to answer. And I'll also check through my email and see if anyone is having a hard time getting in.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. First on our agenda is consideration of amendments. Are there any amendments to today's agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. Did get a message from Chessa. She tried the link on the top of the agenda and that didn't let her in. Approval, next item is approval of the August 12th meeting minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review the meeting minutes? And if so, were there any corrections needed to the minutes? All right. If there are no corrections, do we have a motion to approve the meeting minutes?
This is Sharon Smidler. I make a motion to approve the meeting minutes.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Sharon and Austin. All in favor, vote aye. Voice vote?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? All right. We'll move on to the public comment period. Have we received any public comments, or are there any attendees wanting to comment?
We haven't received any requests. We have some attendees, but no one has indicated they'd like to address the group.
Okay. All right. We'll move on from the public comment period then. CVTA TAC Chair's report. I don't have anything to report. The next item on the agenda is the regional funding deallocation policy, and I'll turn that over to Chet.
Okay, thank you very much. I wanted to point everybody's attention to page. No, they're not numbered. Hang on a second. It would be page 7 of 12 in the packet. And this is a marked up version of the deallocation policy that was first circulated earlier in the summer. A group of volunteers from TAC met, I believe it was after the last Finance Committee meeting, to talk about the policy and to provide suggestions for ways to bring it up to a satisfactory level where TAC might be comfortable enough recommending moving forward with adoption of this policy. And this would be an addition to the financial policies and procedures guidelines that the non-binding guidelines that the CVTA has already adopted. But just to go through the one-page document, essentially what we're trying to do for those of you who haven't been following along is to address the reference in the regional project selection and allocation framework to potential deallocation of funding. If for some reason a project is not able to move forward, there is an option for the CVTA to deallocate those funds, put them back into the reserve or the balance entry, and put them towards a different project. So what we wanted to do is get something in place, and this is working with our legal counsel to address that reference in the framework. And essentially what we're talking about here is if for some reason for a leverage project, if a project sponsor is not able to obtain full funding through leverage resources, the funding may be able to be deallocated. And I think starting in the third paragraph, where there's some blue adjustments, the language that the working group came to an agreement on is if the project sponsor is unable to fully fund the project, and changing it from in the second attempt, because it was previously focused on smart scale, but as we all know, there are multiple ways to fund a project. So the recommendation is to move it away from the number of attempts at smart scale and go towards a timeline. So we changed that to within 4 years of having the funds allocated from the regional pot. The project will be deemed eligible for deallocation. It doesn't automatically move to deallocate the funds, but it is eligible for consideration by the full authority. And then the next paragraph is fully marked through, and the next addressable language is the deallocation process will be considered by both the Technical Advisory Committee and the Finance Committee, with an ultimate recommendation by the Finance Committee to the authority. So that gives us flexibility in having the TAC weigh in. If there are, I'm certain if we get to that point, there will be details about a particular project that the locality or the TAC may want to discuss. But due to the financial nature of the decision, we felt that the ultimate responsibility there is for the Finance Committee to take input from the TAC, but then the Finance Committee makes a recommendation on whether to proceed with the allocation for the full authority to consider. And then finally, project sponsor and or VDOT responses to a potential deallocation shall be considered by the Finance Committee, which will make a recommendation to the CVTA. So again, giving opportunity for whoever the responsible party is to make a case for possible not to consider it for deallocation or some other reason, but the ultimate responsibility comes back to the Finance Committee for recommendation. So that's just a quick run through. The additional language is really what people may not be familiar with. It should be the text for most of the section. It should be familiar to most everybody. But at this point, the agenda, item 7, does have an action requested, and that is for a motion by TAC to recommend adoption of the regional funding deallocation policy by the full authority at their September 27th meeting. Madam Chair, that's the report. I'd be happy to take any questions if anybody has anything else.
So will this go to finance and then the full authority?
I don't believe it is an action item by the Finance Committee, but we will certainly review this with them when they meet on Wednesday morning.
Okay, yeah, it seems appropriate that the finance committee would take action on it. Are there any questions? Amy?
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, just a couple questions, and I maybe a point of clarification. So, we were supposed, there was a subcommittee that had been formed, kind of based on volunteers. And, we were supposed to meet, after, I think, one of the last CVTA meetings. And unfortunately, the group did not actually meet. There was no convening of that committee. There was sort of I think some sidebar conversation that was happening as we were waiting for all the members to get, freed up to be able to join, and that didn't happen. So it was my understanding that there was going to be a follow-up meeting, just a virtual meeting to go through it and discuss it. There was, as I heard, there was discussion about this 4-year proposal, which I think may be just fine. But I think there are details about that that may need to be considered further. And maybe a little bit more of the language needs to be worked out. Because part of it, as I look at it, it says that the deallocation process will be considered. And then it says the CVTA shall notify the project sponsor and or VDOT in writing that it intends to unilaterally deallocate funds for a project. So I think that it seems like two different sentiments there. And also, I think there needs to be a step in there if it is a 4-year process, or a 4-year time frame. Different funding sources have different cycles, and so therefore it might be such that if somebody's at the end of a 4-year time frame, that they might, the funding that they're trying to leverage might be coming up or may not have been decided yet. So it seems to me that we need to have some process in here where either TAC or whomever goes and actually sits down with the project sponsors, or maybe it's CVTA staff that sits down with the project sponsor to understand what the status is of the project. And, if it is just lingering, or if there are other things that might warrant just extending the time frame for a particular project, just by the nature of what might be going on with it. As we all know, each project has different, unique circumstances and issues or not. So I just think there needs to be a little more cleanup of this document before we would send it forward. And maybe we should actually reconvene the group that was supposed to meet initially to go through that. That would just be my thoughts. Thank you.
Are there any other comments?
Madam Chair. All right, I have a couple of comments, actually. I mean, one, I agree with Amy that the subcommittee meeting didn't officially happen and maybe could or should. As we try to work on, because the legal explained that, they're trying to do a high level policy, but Chad, I think it dips into some technical and questions that create that limitation. So I do think maybe that the finance committee, it should kind of be led by the finance committee to recommend a policy that incorporates maybe TAC comments and concerns that we're going to get from the virtual meeting. Because one, and then I'll ask this question, does it impact bond validation if this policy is in place or not?
No.
Thank you. And then one of the things that just goes down to, I like humanizing stuff, and is Commerce Road Fall Line Phase 2 is a part of this sweep that I thought, and I'm not clear if the amount that's allocated for the Commerce Road that's still literally about 38 million short, and in its second run of the smart scale. And really is a large investment that I'm trying to get clarity if the 104 commitment by the CVTA is inclusive of those dollars leveraged there for the Fall Line Trail, and then how a project like that would be impacted by the deallocation. And just to piggyback off that, I didn't know if Henrico had, went through their project, but I just briefly looked at it, like the shore pump. So it says it has 4 years to maybe lose the 60 million of a $300 million project? Or is it because they are requesting all 300 million from the CVTA? It doesn't become one of those deobligated things. So I think really understanding, just not trying to, but I think we've done good at that in applying our theory to projects, and maybe seeing like really what that says is some of the input I would have, and would caution my leadership in approving this without really understanding the impacts. Richmond has, over the last 3 cycles, really been a donor, in some cases conceded, and really a team player. And I think that potentially the deobligation process as it's currently stated would really impact that congeniality that was created with the decisions for the funding of these projects. And so again, those are my comments. Sorry, I get a little emotional because we just talked about Southside and the improvements that the money would do for it. And to see that that could be in jeopardy is really a key to what I'll have to express to my leadership.
Okay, thank you, Dorona and Amy. It sounds like the recommendation from Amy is that we convene the working group to discuss this in further detail. Chet, is there a time issue? Should we be able to, that'll be all right.
Yeah, that'll be
Correct.
fine.
Okay. As you're to the entire TAC, as you're able to review this in more detail, if you see concerns or issues, please share those with Chet or myself, and we'll be sure to share those comments with the working group, which is Amy and me and Dorona. All right, so we'll move on.
Thank you. Did
From
you
this
need a motion
item.
for that, or
Do
was
we
that
need a
okay?
motion?
No, okay,
I don't think we need, I guess we could say defer action.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Defer
we'll
action.
take a motion to defer action on this item.
So moved.
Is there a second?
A second.
Okay, we'll do a voice vote. All in favor, say aye.
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 Anyone opposed? Okay. All right, we'll see this item again at our next meeting. The next item on our agenda is the FY25 local allocation plan. Chet.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. The item number 8, the local allocation plan for FY25, which is our current year, is on page 8 of your agenda packet. This is another action requested to recommend full authority approval of the FY25 local allocation plan. As you all know, I have been pinging you for a little bit to update the projects that are shown for FY25, and this is, for those of you following along at home, a summary table of all of the projects that locality members are intending to use CVTA local funds for in the current fiscal year. So between July 1 and June 30th of FY25, or of calendar year 25. So hopefully everyone has had a chance to review this table and verify that what is shown here is what you have sent me, so that we can accurately reflect what the intentions are for locality members using CVTA local for the current year. And the purpose of this is really to provide a planning document that can be referenced from time to time, to make sure that as we record or send in our quarterly reports, that they match as much as possible with this local allocation plan, so that when we get to the end of the year, there are no surprises in terms of certifying that the funds were spent for the proper transportation uses, and that our CVTA local funds are considered, safe for another year, because we are legislated to only be able to use CVTA dollars for transportation needs. So this can be updated from time to time as project needs change. We all know that happens. So this is really a snapshot in time of what the intent is by each of the members for the current fiscal year. So I think at this point, I'd ask for action to recommend approval unless there are project changes that need to be made that cannot wait or cannot be done at a later point.
Okay. Chet, were you able to talk to everyone so everyone has, that everyone's seen it and had an opportunity to update?
I have talked to everyone. It is, coordinating with all 9 jurisdictions. Hopefully, I've transcribed the right projects to the table. So sometimes that doesn't happen all seamlessly. But if you do see a jurisdiction here that isn't listed, that is because they have no intent of using CVTA dollars this year.
Yeah, I think even that is noted in the
Yes.
table. Yeah,
Okay, right.
okay. Amy?
Oh, yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So Chet, I'm happy to approve this, but can I send you sort of a modified version before it goes to? We're just now getting kind of our work program sorted out. It's been a little bit of a moving target, but I think we have it now. So I don't want to hold everybody else up, but I may have some corrections and additions, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
All right, thank you.
Any other comments? Okay, I think Chet's point is good to remember. It's a flexible document, so we can make revisions through the year. But we're looking for a motion to recommend to the full authority approval of the FY25 local allocation plan. Is there a motion?
Madam Chair, so moved.
Thank you. Is
I'll
there a
second.
second? Thank you. All right, this might require roll call because it's money.
Okay, let's see. Miss Amos,
Aye.
Miss Adams,
Aye.
Chair Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Goyne,
Aye.
Miss Smidler,
Aye.
Miss Inman,
Aye.
and Miss Clark.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to item 9 on the agenda, CVTA Regional Fund interest earnings. Chet.
Thank you. This will be on page 11 of your packet. It is an action item, and it's a fun one kind of, because it's a motion to recommend options for applying regional fund interest earnings. So essentially, dollars that CVTA has accumulated that are not committed to anything at this point. So the Finance Committee is aware of this and asked for additional input from the TAC, because this is something that could implicate additional dollars for particular projects, or maybe not. So I'd ask you to look at page 11, and at that point there's a staff report. So just to review, at the last Finance Committee meeting on August 14th, we regularly discuss the interest earnings and investments of our regional fund. When there are projects that may be a year or two out from tying up those funds, we do from time to time reinvest dollars for a short-term basis to provide more income for the authority. Those interest earnings, especially through the last fiscal year, have grown significantly. And as of June, they totaled $11.6 million. So the Finance Committee, I think, is rightfully asking if there are better places to put that funding as the interest has accumulated, and is looking for guidance from the TAC in terms of possible courses of action. So staff, primarily me, has put together a number of options that are not exhaustive, but at least open up the concept of what we could be doing. And those are shown on page 11, starting there. So number one, we could continue to reinvest funds with the goal of growing our interest earnings even more. That has been the practice so far, working with our fiscal agent in Chesterfield County, and has worked very well. As you can see, the 11.6 million. We could, under item 2, apply interest earnings to regionally identified projects. So just going through the list of regional projects, I pulled out all of the ones that are less than 11.6 million, just for illustrative purposes. So those, say, 5 projects are in the table there. So these projects in one or multiple combinations could be fully funded. The remainder could be fully funded through the application of this 11.6 million. There are also approximately 24 additional projects that have a balance to complete larger than 11.6. So they could be applied to reduce the outstanding need for one or multiple of those projects as well. The third bullet under number 2, the fall line wayfinding plan, identifies the need for committed funding that would provide a much needed resource for maintenance, signage, and related infrastructure along the corridor. We have not yet been able to identify this funding source, as you all know, but it would benefit all 7 jurisdictions impacted by the project. And we've identified about 1.5 million as the goal to provide adequate seeding for this funding source to get started. Number 3, on page 12, set aside as the working capital reserve, which is identified in the financial policies and procedures. The language requires 3 months of the budgeted annual CVTA regional funds to be included in this reserve. And at this point, there has been nothing set aside for the reserve. But to our credit, the action to adjust this section of the financial policies and procedures didn't happen until this past year. So it hasn't been sitting empty for long. So for 2024, the regional revenue funds equals 71.9 million. The reserve, therefore, should be set to just under $18 million. So using this 11.6, we could begin that process of setting aside funding for the working capital reserve in some amount. It could be all of the 11.6, it could be a portion of that. So using those 3 bullet items, I've lined up 6 potential scenarios for how to apply that funding. So just going quickly through scenario 1, continue reinvesting all of the interest income in short-term investments to grow the fund. Scenario 2 would be apply all of the interest income to the working capital reserve, and then commit a percentage of future interest income to that reserve until it is whole. So you've got the balance of 11.6 to roughly 18 to make up in the future. Scenario 3 would be set aside half of the interest income as a arbitrary amount and apply that to the working capital reserve. And then you could fund the balance of a set of those 5 projects that were listed in the table: I-64 Oilville, Route 361 Oak Grove, or Route 1 Ashcake, and then apply the remainder to reinvest. Scenario 4, similar to that, fund the balance of 360 Woodlake Otterdale or Busy Street, fund the fall line maintenance reserve with a portion, and then apply the remainder to the working capital reserve. So that would be, that second bullet there would be the 1.5 for the fall line wayfinding reserve. Scenario 5, fund the balance of 360 Woodlake Otterdale or Busy Street, fund the fall line maintenance reserve, and instead of applying to the working capital reserve, you could apply the remainder to reinvestment. I'm just trying to capture all of the possible options. Scenario 6, finally, would be to develop a custom funding scenario for a combination of projects, and then apply the remainder to reinvestment, the working capital reserve, or possibly the fall line reserve. So with all of that, to confuse your thoughts, happy to take questions and hopefully have a good discussion about what this might mean.
Okay, thanks, Chet. We'll take questions. Dorona?
Thank you. Already, Chet, of course, I have a scenario 7. And only because I don't want to cause the issues with those selected projects. So 7 would be like develop a custom funding scenario for some combination of projects, apply the remainder to reinvestment, WCR, or both, and then fund the fall line maintenance reserve is what I put in as my scenario 7. Thank you.
Let me just make sure I'm understanding. So some combination of projects, the working capital reserve, and then fall line trail.
Reinvestment. I
And
think
and reinvestment.
I mean, I like the or both type of, like, just the language is said in scenario 6, just adding the bullet of from scenario
I see.
5 or 4.
Okay. Chet, when you're saying fall line maintenance reserve, do you mean fall line trail wayfinding?
It would be a combination. I mean, it would include the wayfinding, but then I think with the 1.5, we would have a little bit left over also to start that essentially line item, maybe for the CVTA to have maintenance funding available as well.
Okay.
It would primarily be for full implementation of the wayfinding plan.
Okay. I think Austin was next.
Yeah, it automatically lowered my hand somehow. Thank you. So I see Oilville, I-64 to Oilville is on here. I wish I knew about these funds about 6 months ago because we decided to go ahead and fully fund that, and the agreements are in place now, but it's just not reflected, I guess, online. So as much as I would love to replace some of the funds, I think there's already enough momentum on that. I don't want to screw up anything on Oilville, so we will respectfully decline additional funding on Oilville and be a regional player to allow somebody else to take advantage of these funds. But having said that, I like the scenario 7 that Dorona potentially threw out. I think that's a good way to look at it.
Okay. Sharon?
Hi, I like what Dorona proposed and how it was a good combination of the scenarios Chet threw out there or prepared. I would like it clarified in scenario 7 that the fall line trail or the fall line maintenance reserve includes the wayfinding. I'd like it to be clear in that scenario that it includes wayfinding and maintenance, but I support scenario 7, just clarifying fall line trail wayfinding, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Can someone refresh my memory? Did we decide that the wayfinding is eligible for transportation alternative funding?
We have not determined that for sure. I believe VDOT is here, but I don't know if anybody's prepared to say yes or no, but we could certainly come back with something.
Yeah, I'd like to look into that. I thought we had a discussion and thought that might be a potential source. Okay, Amy?
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. Just for clarification on the maintenance funding, so I guess, can you clarify a little more, Chet, exactly what you mean by the maintenance? Because I'm a little perplexed. Because we've been saying that CVTA is sort of out of the fall line trail business in terms of ongoing maintenance and involvement. So this is kind of a little different if and don't get me wrong, I'm absolutely not opposed to having a maintenance fund. I just am seeking clarification if that's the intent of CVTA to have an ongoing source of money for maintenance. And if so, would we look to the sort of interest income to help fund that going forward? And what would be our level of commitment, our goal to establish that maintenance fund? In addition to, and I think we all need to say that yes to the wayfinding, that project just needs to happen, but then the additional maintenance piece, I feel like is what we need to have a little better clarification on.
Yeah, that's a great question, Amy. I mean, I think that it's probably my fault for not labeling it as wayfinding plant or wayfinding installation / maintenance fund. I think the primary purpose of that would be to fully fund the wayfinding, as I said. I think other than that, we've been going around trying to find ways to fund the wayfinding plan and have not come up with anything. The 7.5 from the General Assembly was not eligible to be used for the wayfinding plan. We figured that out. I have not heard any positive feedback from the localities that anybody has been able to identify additional dollars to fund the wayfinding plan. So much as the CVTA took the step forward to fund 104.5 million for the fall line, I think this is another opportunity for the CVTA to say we are the lead funding partners for this trail, and we're finding a way to do this. The interest income, before seeing the performance of the last year, wasn't really on my radar as a possible funding source.
Right.
But I think it's a pleasant surprise, and it's something that now we've shown month over month that it can be a reliable option as long as the markets continue to perform like they do. I think the idea of having a maintenance fund is one that needs to be discussed. It doesn't necessarily mean if you all take this action to make a recommendation that CVTA is committed to funding all maintenance for the fall line, but it could be a resource to provide some matching funds or some other type of maybe small grants for maintenance. But I think that is something that TAC would certainly need to discuss a lot more in detail over the next few months. But this was just, brainstorming, coming up with the scenarios. So I think that that's something that I'm happy that we're getting the feedback that we are.
Yeah, I think that when we were talking about that 7.5 million, there was, and I might be making too big a leap, but I thought that there was general support for carving off some of that for wayfinding. And then we found out that it would not be eligible. But I do agree that there needs to be a bigger discussion on a maintenance line item, and would suggest that maybe we move that over to the Fall Line Trail Working Group for first conversations. If the TAC agrees, that would be appropriate.
I'd make a suggestion that we change that scenario 7 to list the third
Just call it
bullet as
wayfinding.
Ms. Clark, and just call it wayfinding,
Okay,
just to avoid any confusion at this point. And we can always come back and once the work group has more input, we can add that back in if that's a choice.
okay. As I was reviewing this prior to the meeting, my gut reaction was to get our house in order with funding the working capital reserve as our first priority. And I don't know from strategy wise whether it makes sense to keep reinvesting the interest income until we get to that dollar amount, or, does it really matter? Will it be, or will the interest be earning its own interest? Anyway, so that was my feeling, is that before we start looking at, I guess I wouldn't be opposed to putting it towards wayfinding. That's a small amount of money, but my gut reaction was, let's get the working capital reserve in place, because that's a recommendation from our financial advisors. Dorona?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think, I'm not sure if I agree or disagree. I think that from the tax recommendation, I think that the Finance Committee should be making a decision on these funds for reinvestment, and even if we have the priority. So, so some combination of projects is like our number one, wayfinding number two, WCR number, I think that there was some order there that the Finance Committee, I think, could make, and that these plus the maintenance reserve are good ideas that have come out of TAC to say, hey, this is what we think could happen. And while not making any action potentially today, we just take it as potentially a information item to the body, to see, to the Finance Committee, to see if this is something they're willing to entertain us going, down that route.
Are you suggesting that maybe instead of building these scenarios, we say you could do this or this or this or this or some combination?
Yeah, and do they have a priority potentially on that? I think I hear good ways if the TAP money can do some of the wayfinding, that's helping with the projects that Chesterfield, the busy street, or whichever ones may be needed. And then the wayfinding, because all of it's going to equal a dollar amount, the wayfinding, but I think the reinvestment is smart. I think the WCR working towards that is smart. And I do think that the fall line maintenance reserve is worth a conversation to again say, hey, we have this, we don't really have a funding source, and Richmond has been speaking unhappy, and maybe we don't even get a penny of it, but again, it's for a person in Richmond's state that may be, utilizing these funds in the future. So I think it's a cool way now that we're actually getting to tell the authority some ideas with interest money. Like, this is awesome for the authority to be talking about.
Yep, thank you. Chet?
I don't disagree with Dorena's suggestion. I think that I would be a little uncomfortable if the Finance Committee was going to make project recommendations. So I think at this point, if TAC has any particular projects that they would like to fund, that would be well received by the Finance Committee. But I think in terms of the working capital reserve and interest reinvestment, that's certainly something that is well within the Finance Committee's jurisdiction to make those decisions. But I think if we're talking about, we'd like to set aside 1.5 for wayfinding and then something else for another project or two, they would really like to hear that from the TAC.
Yeah, I don't support using the interest earning towards projects. Two of the projects, the ones in Chesterfield, are in smart scale right now. I'm hopelessly optimistic. I think it's premature for our projects. So I'd be more comfortable just recommending the other ideas except for projects. But I'm open to the group. It seemed like there was support towards projects, and if that's the case, please, let's have more conversation on that.
I would concur. I think it would be appropriate to just go with the wayfinding and the interest income and the capital reserve. And I guess I am perplexed at how these particular projects were selected. Chet?
I think they just made the cut. What Chet explained when he was going through it, they just made the cut because they were the right amount of money. They were under
There were,
11.
but I think there are other projects that have the amount of money as well, so, I just wondered how that happened.
There are
So I
regional,
don't,
the regionally approved projects that have already been approved in the first 3 rounds. The balance remaining on the ones that the 5 that are in the report are below 11 million. The other ones are above that, but could still be funded partially.
yeah,
was what the
exactly,
language
and
was.
I think that's the point, right?
Yeah, and Chet did explain that when he went through.
He did, but I guess I just wanted to clarify that there are other projects out there that need to be funded and should have been potentially funded, and they shouldn't be overlooked.
Okay. All right, any other comments? If we're ready, I think we're prepared to make a recommendation for finances consideration that they consider using the interest income for reinvestment or towards the working capital reserve or I should have said or for all of them or what was the other one? Oh, I'm sorry, Fall Line Trail wayfinding, sorry. If there is a motion to that effect. Jerona, do you have a comment?
I'll wait for the motion. I'm sorry.
Okay. Is there a
Sure.
motion?
Sharon Smidler, second.
Thank you, Sharon. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thanks, Amy. And discussion, Jerona?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly still say that this is still leaving out for consideration the maintenance reserve. And I'm not understanding how that isn't being considered for the finance committee.
Yeah, I think what I probably need tax concurrence on this. We're suggesting that go back to the Fall Line Trail Working Group for discussion. The maintenance specifically as a line item.
But I think that, okay, and I understand that, but if we are if the finance committee is the money, them going back to consider for a line item and there's no consideration for money, the line item doesn't matter. So what I'm saying is, so I can end it in regard to, so both the fall line maintenance reserve and the funding scenario of some combination of projects have been removed. And we're only going with apply the remainder to reinvestment WCR and then the fall line wayfinding. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's what's on the table at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Amy?
So just a quick follow-up. So would it be possible to, I guess, just run this by the finance committee this week about the fall line maintenance before it would go back to the fall line working group? Because I would hate to send it to the working group and that not be supported by the CVTA and get people's, sort of hopes up and have a big conversation about it. And then, it puts the finance committee and the board and the CVTA board in an awkward position if they don't want to do it, if there's other thoughts about that.
Okay, well, Chet, do you have a response or comment?
Yeah, thanks. I think this is a great conversation. I think the unknown right now is what amount makes sense for a maintenance reserve. We haven't really gotten into that kind of detail in terms of, the extent of the 43 miles. Is it a percentage calculation? Like what's the amount we're talking about? And I think that would be a good discussion for the work group. If the work group does come up with any ideas, it would have to come back through the TAC before any action takes place. So we could certainly raise that in the staff report on Wednesday with the finance committee, but I think there's too many unknowns in terms of what the actual dollar amount would need to be for them to have to take any action on it. So I think there's, as you said, Barb, there's a little bit more work that needs to be done before we can have a maintenance reserve on this as a discussion point for an action item.
And moving forward would not preclude fall line trail maintenance being considered for CVTA regional outside of the
Absolutely.
interest
Yeah,
earnings.
right.
Okay, Dorona?
Yep. Last thing. And so, Chet, on that point, because one, I do agree with Amy that I just skimmed through the projects, and CVTA specifically number 46 has a balance that's under 11 million, really under 500,000 that wasn't really considered. And then the reinvestment in the WCR, we have neither a amount of realization or what that would look like either, do we? I mean, do you have, I mean, I don't know if you presented in your scenarios and I missed it, but I think that those are just as broad as, I'm sorry, your mistake on here, the fall line maintenance reserve.
The working capital reserve under item 3 at the top of page 12 is calculated at just under 18 million. That's what we need.
Oh, yeah, but I mean, you have the 5.8 million potentially, and then, so that's the working capital. And then 1.2, let me make sure I have it here, 1.5 or 1.2 for the wayfinding, 5.8. What's
I
the
think-
wayfinding?
Yeah, I think scenario number 3 was just Chet pulled a number out of the air and said, let's put 5.8 towards working capital reserve.
And to my point, I'm saying that again, knowing whether or not to put 500,000 in the maintenance reserve or 5 million, we don't know that either. And so to exclude it based on it needs more clarification, I'm not sure that we have the clarification that WCR needs to be done. And maybe the finance committee will only do that with the reserves as we're still short of what the policy says. And
Right, it needs 18. Yep. Okay, I would ask, am I allowed to call the question? Yeah. Okay, let's call the question and take a vote. And what is on the table currently is to recommend to the Finance Committee using the interest earnings towards reinvestment, continued reinvestment, and or funding towards the working capital reserve and or fall line trail wayfinding. And we'll do a roll call on that. Janice?
Madam Chair,
Yeah.
is there any notation in that motion for the FYI of, or for Chet to say this during the Finance Committee meeting in which he discloses those items?
I will promise to do that.
Yeah.
Does that
That's
work?
what,
Thank you.
Okay.
That sounds good, or I can amend my motion to include that if that would be help everything.
Sharon, if you would, I would appreciate it.
I don't know if I can repeat everything, but I do amend the original motion to include briefing the finance to, if Chet would be so kind to brief the finance committee about that.
On the conversation that we're having?
Yes,
Correct.
thank you.
Okay. I think Austin, were you the second?
I think Amy was.
Oh,
I am.
Amy. Okay. Are you good with that, Amy?
yep, perfect, yep, thank you.
Okay, great. All right, we'll take a roll call vote.
All right, Miss Amos,
Aye.
Ms. Adams,
Aye.
Chair Smith,
Aye.
Mr. Goin,
Aye.
Ms. Smidler,
Aye.
Ms. Inman,
Aye.
and Ms. Clark.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries. All right. Thank you all. That was a good discussion. Next on our agenda is the CVTA project selection allocation framework for regional. And I will share my screen if I can figure out how on here. I had it up. What is it? Like here it is, right here.
You probably can just share your main screen right there.
Like right here. Is that what you mean? Oh, that right here. Keep doing that.
Yeah.
Okay, can people see the
Looks
PowerPoint?
good. Yep.
Hmm. Okay, do you want to do the talking? Chessa's here.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I see smiling faces, so I think you can hear me. You don't need to see me.
Hey, Jessica.
I had difficulties getting into the meeting today. So we need to wrap up our parking lot items so we can make the revisions to our framework document, the ones that we agree need to be made. So I basically just cobbled, I think we had 14 items. So I'm just gonna run through these and kind of summarize where we settled, and folks jump in if you disagree.
Oh, and before you get too far,
Mhm.
Chet did distribute this PowerPoint and the revised framework document last week, maybe Thursday.
Yeah.
So you've got that in your inbox. Hopefully you had a chance to look at it.
Okay, so number one, regional benefit. Post last round, we had a lot of discussion about how much how much benefit only was considered as part of the process when selecting projects, and we were kicking around, do we need to modify our scoring processes in any way to formalize that? And based on discussions, where I think we landed was staff would score projects, benefit to cost ratios and ranked per our framework document, and we would also provide the benefit only scores and rankings as well with the BC scores and rankings, so that information would be presented, but no proposed changes to the actual scoring process, if you will. So no update to the framework language for benefit only. I can't see people, so I
know.
can't read their faces, but
So let me see. Maybe I should do this.
yeah, can you do a, no, that works. Should I just roll, or I don't see any hands up?
Yeah, if someone could kind of keep an eye on the chat in case, that would be great.
Okay,
But yeah, we can see people. So if you raise your hand, we'll call on you.
okay. Number two, project readiness. Again, we were trying to consider, is there something we need to do to formalize how that's considered as part of the process? And we had some group discussion about readiness is different depending on what funding source you're going after. Folks expressed, needing flexibility if you have some sort of economic development project that may arise. So what we decided was not to update the framework document to specify it in any more detail than we have readiness requirements, but that we would get input from DRPT or VDOT kind of when we're working through projects selection or scoring or application and validation, if you will, on readiness if necessary, but that we weren't gonna update the document to be smart scale, if you will, on readiness requirement.
There you are.
There I am. So no changes as to readiness in the document is what I recall from the group. Number three, leveraging. We had some discussion about, scorecards and cleaning up the information that was included in the scorecard. So we're gonna make sure to do that. That folks know in the scorecards that go out how much of the request, or if the request is a leveraging amount. So that's just cleanup on the scorecards, but again, not documenting or making any changes to that in the framework language. Number 4, so this one was a big discussion. I think this is probably one of our ongoing ones, was how are we going to consider, and I switched it to say off-cycle project requests for both new projects or existing projects that are out of cycle. So that first sub-bullet, the existing framework language, says per the quotes that that CVTA regional funding cycle coincides with non-smart scale years. What is that? Odd years.
That's right.
And we went down this path of saying, well, should we have a formal intake window for off-cycle requests? But then when we work through that schedule, it's really difficult to do. So like if we took this year as an example, you would, if we were going to take requests in this year,
It would be right now.
it would be right now, but we don't know smart scale results until the beginning of next year, which will then,
You're right on top of the
The-
normal cycle.
right.
Yeah.
So what I show as a resolution to this is that off-cycle funding requests for new and existing projects, including, I think that says leveraging underneath the one, would be considered on a case-by-case basis, that we won't have a set window. But requests come in, TAC validates the need for the off-cycle request, so why you can't wait for an odd year, irregular cycle. So if you went to award, you needed to award your, you got bids in and you need to award and you need a few more dollars, that would be an example to consider. You know, TAC would have to figure out if that's a valid request. And then step 2 is to see if there's any available funds. We had a lot of discussion about that. You know, our dollars are programmed out. So if there's not any funding available, is there opportunities to reprogram some funds? Basically, step 2 is vetting, is there money available? And then if it clears step 2, then staff would make sure it's an eligible request, score it, and then rank it against the previous funding scenario and make a recommend. And then TAC would have to hear that out and make a recommendation to the authority. Maybe I should pause on that. So basically, if you have a case to be made and some unique request that falls outside of a non-smart scale year, bring it to TAC and we'll vet it.
Make a case.
Mhm.
Yep.
That makes sense.
Okay.
All right. Thanks, Sharon.
Sharon? We resolved this pretty early on. This is basically, we promised a parking lot item was to go back and look at our schedule. We had a lot of discussion that we needed some more time where we could eke it out to vet estimates from third-party reviews and have time to have the iterative process of, you know, it's built in the framework that you have an opportunity to see your scores
And adjust your request. Yeah.
So basically, Chet went back through and just starting with the July window, you know, pushed back our application window, I think, to start in July, because we were starting it in August, I think. So basically, we just stretched out the schedule as best we could, and this is kind of where we landed. The bullets on the bottom, we talked about combining, you know, taking months, like maybe that, let's see, February, kind of at the beginning of the year, basically, that maybe if we need to have multiple meetings in a month so that we can vet this, because it takes time for us to all get on the same page as to what projects should be funded. So maybe we have to have multiple meetings in 1 month.
Chester, I really think that was probably the December meeting when we're gonna have a lot of TAC discussions and possibly readjusting the they asked.
So I will make a note that that's specific to maybe December. Yeah. And then we talked about cost validation and project scoring happening at the same time, again, trying to condense our, working with our condensed schedule to move it along as fast as we can, but also providing enough time for everything to get worked through. So, and then the last bullet, again, is trying to allow time, because we heard from applicants that there wasn't enough time to react to the scoring when the scoring came out, to really get in the weeds and meet with staff to ask about why was this scored this way, and trying to understand it and have time to vet the scoring as well as make any adjustments to your funding request. So again, this is the stretched out schedule that it's probably as stretched out as it can get.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's
Everybody good?
schedule. Okay, number 6, we talked about, can we memorialize, or should we memorialize in the framework, or require that applicants get buy-off from other localities on their projects, that they support, another applicant's projects, and that's not really a technical measure, short of saying political, but support for the project bears out through the process, if you will, between TAC, finance, and the authorities. Not really a technical measure that we wanted to put in the framework document. Number 7, adjusted funding request. That goes back to people need time to see how they scored, and if they were gonna, if they scored poorly and they want to reduce their ask, they need, or they want to ask for more, or, we're supposed to allow time for that. So we revised the schedule to try to support the iterative process that's already noted in the framework document. So no real edits to the document for that. Oh, 8 was a good one. We talked about, so if everyone recalls, last round, staff scored the projects, came up with the benefit cost, followed the framework guidance on which projects to fund. So they scored every project, and then they were scored within their project categories. And then we had some checks in the framework document that said proportionate to the request is how you fund down the list. And so staff followed the framework document, and then there were remaining funds that could be allocated, and then they took the next step to take a stab at, after they did the first pass, they took a second pass with the remaining funds and picked other projects. And we're saying the next go round, that staff should go through the initial funding recommendation based on the guidance in the framework, and then let TAC figure out how to allocate whatever balance didn't get used with that first pass, if that makes sense. I don't know if everyone remembers that. Oh, there we go.
There's some hands raised.
I didn't see the order. Amy's smiling, so she goes first.
Well, I just want to say I completely agree that I if there are funds remaining, that could go towards the next eligible project, that project sponsor should be notified of that, and it should not be a unilateral decision by CVTA staff to do that and to take that funding and put it over into other buckets. I think that first needs to go back to the locality to say, yes, we'll be happy to take a lower amount for our project to leverage smart scale. And then, that decision can then go back to the TAC. But I do think it needs to be up to the locality if they're falling at that cusp where they're just maybe $1 million or so short of being fully funded, then you know what, they'll go ahead and take that amount to leverage. So that's what I really think that was, that's something that should just be normal protocol.
Yeah, and I think, to your point, Amy, that is the iterative part that we needed to be more
Clarify
clear.
also.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
because I mean, that seriously, put us in a very bad situation.
understood. Yep. So we'll,
And yeah, had we have known and been given the, notification of that, we would have had the ability to sit down and have that conversation.
Mhm.
Okay.
Nope, that's good.
Dirona?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is, of course, for the next one on the transfer
Yeah.
station.
Okay.
I would say that a suggested resolution would be that the authority does look at some type of measures and benefit for these types of transit projects. Again, in staying with the flexibility and just the size of these projects.
Yeah.
I know GRTC is doing everything with their CVTA money to make things happen. They're really pushing the envelope. Barb knows that firsthand. And again, I think that something like a BRT project would take a lot of partners potentially to build it. And then, where a cross or a stop intercepts with the bus stop, a current BRT, is that going to be negative because existing BRT service already exists? Or should it be positive because it's building on the service? And to have a temporary transfer station and say it's there, I think that the patrons there would disagree that that is an appropriate station for them. Without restrooms, without covering from the elements, it's very key. So again, I would ask that the resolution be that that the TAC will consider this at least on their next parking lot items next year to
And
Miles might be on to speak to.
it might be something we can work on.
Yeah,
this year.
now,
Mhm,
ongoing.
exactly.
Okay.
Miles?
Sure. I mean, to Dorona's point, I think the challenge here is that the measures that the CVTA has decided to carry forward from what we had at the LRTP and what we use in RSTP CMAC are much more narrowly oriented towards those that are modeled. So it requires increases in frequency or the number of riders. There has to be something that we can put a number to be able to carry those forward. And those just don't play out with like that kind of TOD concept, which I think this project has. So there wasn't really a way for us to capture the benefits of putting a structure and housing and mixed use development, because it's broader than the transportation benefit in a lot of ways. And it just doesn't line up with the sort of modeled inputs that go into what we've decided to use.
and I think that, Madam Chair.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that, but for Richmond to have a pillar TOD development, I think then that some economic or some other measures need to be considered because, transportation is a catalyst for economic development. And again, if the model, again, is not taking into some of those constraints, again, that may be something that we need to look at for the CVTA, because again, it's trying to improve the economic vitality of localities by helping to fund these projects that we need. So again, I think that just saying that there's not metrics existing, I think that with some TOD and the movement of it, there has to be some way to measure the benefit differently.
Miles?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to clarify, Dorona, we had those measures from what came in the LRTP. So we had an economic development measure. We had an activity center related measure that was really focused on building in areas where we have activity and density. So there were measures, but those were all GIS based. They weren't specific to the transportation project. They were more location dependent. And so I think that was the original decision to pull those out from the CVTA. So we have the data and we use it for other things, so it could be applied. So if that is the direction TAC wants to go, it's something we could definitely work on preparing, but that was the decision at some point, was to pull that out from what we did with CVTA.
And can I,
Sure.
real quick, so maybe what we can do is dust off one of those LRTP measures because we score within categories.
Maybe we decide this particular category,
Correct.
we introduce some of those that are good, applicable towards transit stuff.
Right.
I think Chet was next.
I don't have any comments.
You changed your mind.
Sorry.
Okay. Dirona?
Yes, thank you. I agree with what everyone has said. Thank you, Jessica.
Okay, Miles, I'll get with you offline and we can take a look at those and maybe we pull this one out as an ongoing one and we can get the rest of these that we agreed to resolve. So, okay, Darana, we'll keep munching on it.
Yeah. Amy?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was just going to agree with that. I mean, if you look at what has happened with the Pulse, when we first identified those station locations, there was nothing there, right? I mean, there was a glimmer in the eye of Scott's Addition and, these other station locations. And, maybe I'm a little biased, but I believe that really did spur a lot of the economic development and the type of development that has now generated when you start to see a lot more residential in those areas, and they're all taking advantage of the BRT. So I really think that just that alone should provide evidence that it is a catalyst for economic development. So I think other localities should really look at that, and absolutely it should be part of the scoring matrix for transit projects.
Okay, great.
That sounds great. Yep.
Let's see.
Okay, we are on number, that's good. We'll keep working on 9. 10 is, the question was asked, is there a better way to score PE only requests? And I think because again, that strategy of PE only projects are compared to other PE only projects. So you're measuring the benefits of a potential project, even though you're just requesting money to start PE. So it's compared to other PE only. And in the framework document, we have guidance on the dollar amount is capped. I can't remember how much it is, top of my head, but we say a certain amount of dollars, up to a certain amount of dollars can go to fund PE only projects. And then we work our way down the list based on the scores for those projects. So I'm not proposing any changes to how we score PE only projects. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I did want to sort of separately from the discussion. I wanted to bring up to the group whether we should consider modifying those caps. It's like 5% and 10%. I can't remember, like 5% for studies, 10% for PE.
That's right.
In light of the conversations we've been having with bonding, how if you're going to bond, you really need projects that are going to spend money in a hurry. So they need to be developed further along, maybe 30% plans. And I think our framework does restrict CVTA regional to 30%. It doesn't go beyond that. But if we have CVTA regional projects that we're considering for bonding, getting them further along will help us meet the time frame element associated with bonding. So I just wanted to bring that up to the group, and that might be something that we talk about further outside of this, like we are with transit stuff. But Dirona?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I totally agree. I think that, I think we need to work on that because I think it'll help the authority in a couple of ways. One, you won't get projects holding up large sums of money, but actually, just start the planning phase there at the authority. And I know we talked about it, once you do that, you kind of get all of these as your legacy projects. So yeah, I think some consideration on the percentage cap should be looked at in order to appease everyone. You know, I think that
Okay, so Chet, can we add that as another agenda topic to start diving into a little bit more?
Sure.
And, that was 10. All right. Last page, this is just cleanup. So number 11, we had a lot of discussion about what information should be on the scorecards, and we settled on what should be on those. Last round, more information, basically. The request, how much is our the estimate, how much is being requested, if it's leveraging. So more information on the scorecards, and then we spent some time on the draft recommended funding scenario that went out for public review. And we really got stuck on the recommended funding scenario because TAC was still working through the final recommended funding scenario. So I think what I have as a resolution is basically using last round's edits as our template moving forward for the scorecards and the information that went, the format of the information that went out for the public review, and using that as our template moving forward. But I wasn't gonna propose to make any edits to the framework document. I see something in the chat, and I don't know if someone
Lisa.
has their hands up either. 30%, okay. For planning. PD.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Yep.
Let's see. Oh, guess who it is? It's Tyrona. Go ahead.
Hit it, Dirona.
oh God, way to make me feel good.
Oh, I
like,
appreciate your
no
input,
questions
Tyrona.
dumb question. No, let's see. Yeah, so I see what you're saying. I think there does need to be some work on how that relayed to the public. So if I don't know, use last round edits as template is maybe the best way to describe what we're gonna do just there.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, something that Chad is comfortable with, because he has his stance on, this is the top projects of the money going down here as the scenario. We've also put the constraints or about providing the benefit cost information. And so again, I think those things may need to happen before we put that final one out for the public. And I think maybe the timing addresses that, but
Yeah, that's fair. Basically, we bless it before it goes out, like we did this round. I think in the actual framework document, I suggest removing, I'll pull it up,
The word recommended.
the word recommended, because really what went out was staff's funding scenario. The first cut based on
first
the
attempt.
framework document is what went out. It wasn't the TAC recommended or authority recommended funding scenario.
yeah, but
So,
I think the chat wants it to be recommended.
oh,
And that we need to get it in a format and have the meetings before to get that
get it as far along and have it actually yeah. I don't know.
Yeah,
Go
like
ahead, Chad. I don't know if the schedule allows for it. We'll see.
I don't have a strong preference. I mean, I think it's funny calling it the staff recommended scenario because it's really the framework recommended scenario. But if we want,
We can call
I
it
mean,
that.
the authority keeps talking about public input and public involvement.
They
And
do.
if we want the public to be involved, we should show them all the possible projects that are after that first cut. Show them what the framework says, and then using all that, we can go
Yeah.
back and refine, and TAC could have that input as well to come up with a recommendation.
Yeah.
And that's what we talked about, is that
Yeah.
Mhm.
the scenario that went out
Mhm.
was just, here's the first cut, and we
But-
want your input, public, and we are getting tax input.
Right.
This is what everyone's reacting to.
And I think to Dirona's point, we just don't need, let's not lose sight of in the timeline to where we can all agree this is what is how it's going to go out. We all weigh in on that,
Mhm.
right? Okay.
Dirona?
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, I think I got it, Chessa. So, yeah, we do this before, well, because I guess, because I'm a little bit unclear, I'm sorry, because Chet, are we gonna call it staff's recommended? Or again, is it staff recommended comes to TAC? And then we agree, because what are we agreeing? You know what I mean? Where do we get that power to say, move, it's different? I mean, again, or we're just saying this is the output of the process, right? And then based on the output of the process, we are to accept that as recommendation from us. And I think that didn't happen this year. And are we
I think
anticipating it happening next year
as long
or next year?
as the timing works out, the best way to do this to provide the most opportunity for the public to be involved is for a framework recommendation or staff recommendation, whatever you want to call it, that just gets put out for review. And then using the input received, TAC can make a recommendation. The other way to do that is for TAC to come up with a recommendation and then put it out for public
Right,
review,
which we ran out of time.
which we ran out of time for. So, I mean, I think those are the two
Yeah,
immediate working options to be considered.
so maybe I should reword the resolution as you have those
Well,
two
one of the
options.
things, Chester, when you say the framework, I think, and I'm sorry, I just remembered, we played with the coloring in the framework on what said funded and not funded.
Yeah.
Remember that big conversation?
Yes.
So I think it was still key if we put it out, because it's like, yeah, because we still had people say, hey, you said you're going to fund this, and now, hey, now you're funding, this other stuff. And again, that's all from the project list, and the public input is what we're saying will happen for that list to be, how much influence does this, the public input have just to whatever the authority member gets from their constituency? Or, like in Richmond, are we going to be swayed by Richmond because Richmond Smart Growth says, no, I'm sorry. Just using an example
Yeah.
of transportation, sustainability groups that want to protect the environment. That's my disclaimer. But again, so I just want to make sure we understand and we're thinking about that as we do this.
Okay. Sorry. So if you were to go back to number 10, the resolution, we basically know, oh no, 11, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
You're okay.
Oh, I went the wrong way.
You're okay. Yeah, we're not gonna necessarily to be determined.
Y'all aren't going to like this, but I don't know if it's a TAC. This is a TAC thing.
What do you mean?
I think staff could work to figure out the best way to release this for public review.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right, so what do I say is my resolution?
Chet says,
No need to add the
change,
framework.
leave it.
I think you got it.
No need to add to, I'll delete this out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Amy?
Well, I guess it is going to be helpful to know, when and how it's going to be released, right? To the public. So I guess whatever you decide, Chet, that needs to sort of dovetail in with the process. I agree, maybe it doesn't need to be in the framework, but I do think the localities and certainly our elected officials are going to want to know when it goes out and how it goes out and what that message looks like.
All right. All right. Anybody else?
Thank you for those comments. That was good. Number 12, legacy. How should we handle legacy projects? Should they get first consideration? I didn't have much here. I'm open to everyone. We don't really have any yet. Thank goodness, right? We don't have any lingering projects. We consistently across the board with other funding sources give more consideration to projects that are about to be delivered versus the ones that are earlier in the project development process. But as far as the framework document and memorializing it right now, we don't really have that as an issue right now.
But I think that's a good thing to keep in the back of our minds as we're talking about maybe increasing these caps on studies and PE only. This was brought up before when we were developing the framework. We don't want to invest a whole bunch of money into project plans without a clear path forward to actually get them delivered. So when we're talking about the caps, PE only and studies, let's keep, in the back of our mind, we don't want to get stuck with a whole bunch of plans that are sitting on the shelf. So let's try to wrap that into that discussion. Dirona?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, I was just gonna add that potentially, just prior in the meeting, talking about the deallocation process, we may get legacy projects like you were saying. So yeah, I think that keeping in mind and really starting to think about what approach we will have for these legacy projects forward would be a good item to keep discussing.
So this might be a long-term topic,
Mhm.
ongoing topic, yeah.
Amy?
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it's a matter of if, it's a matter of when we have legacy projects, and the, sort of the example or what has been happening in other funding arenas has been they've jumped to the front of the line, right? Because we want to get them off the books, right? They've been hanging around. We want to get them off the books, but do they score? Where, and does that really justify moving other projects that are ready and have maybe better merit in terms of scoring than some legacy project from 1997? And I'm not saying anything wrong with, these projects, but they still need to go through some sort of screening and validation for them to jump in front of all the other projects. I don't think they should just automatically get preference.
Okay.
That's fair. All right, so we'll wrap that into some of our other discussions and then keep this in the,
Try to avoid getting into the situation to start with.
right.
Right.
Okay, 13, deobligation process, or deallocation policy. I think you guys just took action to move it to the authority. So the resolution will be for the framework document to point to that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we actually took action to send it back to the working group.
Oh, back to work.
Yeah, I missed. So you were trying to get connected.
But everyone's in agreement. Obviously, we'll have a policy. Hopefully we'll work through that, have a policy, and then this framework will point to that policy.
Yeah.
And then lastly, third-party estimate reviews. Again, we didn't have enough time to really munch on that with the consultants' reviews. And so our schedule tried to account for more time in the schedule as best we could. So,
Just one
yes.
quick, I'm
Sorry,
sorry,
Amy.
just one quick comment about that. So as I recall, and Chet, please correct me if I'm wrong, but the delay on that was because of procurement. You were kind of stuck in the procurement process of getting consultants on board to do the work.
Well, that's a good question.
And that was kind of part of the delay. Am I wrong about that, or is that part of it?
No, that's correct. We've resolved that. So.
So, right, so now, hopefully that won't be a factor going forward.
Yeah,
That's good.
Yeah, between the adjustments in the schedule and having
Them ready to go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we should be good.
Okay. I was gonna thumb through, there were just some minor edits on the document, and then we can let everyone go. That basically, there was just a few. So edits to the document, go back one folder or one, working one. So, I think the first edit, track changes, should be on, I think we sent it out. was editing the language for, that we will take off-cycle requests basically anytime on a case-by-case basis.
This is about it. Oh, here we go. I found it. That's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. So, the wording can be cleaned up. If folks have any edits, let me know, but basically striking the, alternate years funding requests for existing projects and then adding off-cycle requests. You can submit them on a case-by-case basis. TAC's got to validate the request to understand what the need is. And then staff will see, is there even any available funding? And then if it is it eligible, score it and rank it, and then TAC review that and make a recommendation. So trying to remain flexible for that. Go ahead.
Chet?
Just process-wise, is the request supposed to come to the chair? Does it come to
Good question.
staff? How do you want this to work?
I would say it should go to staff. Which, if someone were to send me a request, it'll get stuck in my inbox. Amy?
So I guess to that point, my question is for staff, like staffing. If these requests come in, randomly at different times, is that, is that going to be sort of a burden? When they're basically going to go back and revalidate and rescore the project before it comes to TAC. That's a lot of work. If it's just sort of a random, request.
I guess
There's no
that
real
would be-
time frame for people to be able to do that. And to that point, maybe some localities might be kind of on the cusp of wanting to ask, but they don't. And so another locality comes in and they do it. And so there's just really not a set time frame for that to sort of level the playing field for everybody and to be respectful of staff and of their time. So those are just thoughts. I'm not saying
Yeah,
anything more.
I think how we had anticipated it would work was that TAC would validate the need for the request or
Mhm.
occurring off cycle as a step one. And then as a step two, see if there's available funds. So it wouldn't all happen straight out of the chute. It would,
Come as an idea, a request, and then,
yeah.
but I guess, if we don't know the money's there or not, it's all gonna have to come back to TAC again, right? So it seems
Yeah.
a little
Yeah.
haphazard to me. That might not be the right word, but
Hmm.
it, I know
think
that
it's-
there's no real good timing for a set off schedule, off cycle, funding request period, just by the way things are working, but
I
It
don't
does
see that
seem
we
that-
would be accepting requests for funding unless they're on the off cycle, unless there was a triggering need. Like
Mhm.
Jessa said before, if you had advertised the project, bids came in, you need more money and there's a time element associated with it.
Mhm.
If you completed PE and needed to move into right of way and your estimate was high, well, that probably could wait until we're in the normal cycle.
Mhm.
Dirona?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Yeah, I was gonna say maybe we just simply put step in front of the number.
Okay.
And then I guess check potentially we treat it like we do tip amendments. And so they are they're looked at by the TAC for that step one at the regular scheduled TAC meeting potentially. I don't know.
Yeah, that's good. Chet?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. The first two steps are not time consuming for staff.
Yeah.
We'll be the intake and receive the request and then get it on an upcoming TAC agenda for discussion by you all. We could certainly check on the balance entry and what's available for the year. That's not a big issue. It's when we get to step three, which will be a TAC action, to say, all right, it makes it through these two gates, let's move forward with the modeling and everything else. That'll be the more intensive time, but we're not there automatically. So I think as long as we follow the steps, like what Dorena was saying, treat it like a TIP amendment.
Mhm. Okay,
Yeah, this should work.
Madam
All
Chair,
right.
I just had one thing also.
Sure.
So Chet made a point, and so maybe in number 2 or at the end of number 2, something about to move to step 3 requires like TAC action.
I can clarify that.
Okay.
Yep.
all right.
Okay. And then if you move through eligibility, we just cleaned up this table a little bit under bridges. So it's not red, but it should be. But you see under the bridge eligibility, I struck out. So the first bullet says a CVTA regional bridge project is eligible if it's on VDOT state of good repair, if it meets VDOT state of good repair eligibility requirements, which
And,
means,
yeah.
and meet CVTA regional highway eligibility requirements. But then I go on to say that state of good repair eligibility is this and has to be on the NBI. That's redundant text. And so I'm proposing to strike that because that's included in bullet 1, because now you know how they made the changes where cusp bridges are now eligible for state of good repair. That's how.
Yeah, that's how the conversation
Yeah.
started, is VDOT has opened up state of good repair for bridges to include CUS guys. So we wanted to make that same change and just figured we'll get rid of the language that doesn't match and just say, if you meet VDOT's eligibility and you're on the CVTA highway regional eligible, then you could request funds for bridge as well.
So we cleaned that up. Oh, go ahead,
Dirona.
Sorry. So is it clear to say that the national bridge inventory is now in the state of good repair, or that just because we have this CVTA highway regionally eligible criteria that encompasses those bridges?
I thought that the MBI was part of VDOT's criteria for state of good repair eligibility.
Okay, maybe.
Yeah.
So you're covered with the first bullet.
Okay.
Okay, and then I think the next minor edit was here. Scroll up a little bit. So this is just the guidance on how we select projects. And this goes back to once we've once staff has scored the projects, they'll draft we will have this number 4 is what I'm talking about here under step 4. CVTA TAC will review staff's draft funding scenario, make revisions if necessary, and provide a funding scenario to the CVTA authority, requesting them to approve it for public review. So this is back to that conversation of what goes out. And we just settled on agreeing to review that next go round before it goes out.
Yeah.
Or the process.
And it's not even, it doesn't say staff or framework, just general funding scenario, open-ended.
Yeah. Does that kind of track with the discussion? Yeah.
Okay.
All right. And then I think,
Is that it?
I think that's it. All we had left was to point towards the
Deallocation policy.
and that's it.
Yay! Oh my gosh. I'm gonna stop sharing.
Oh, I appreciate each and every one of you. That was good. We have transit. I'll get with Miles. We'll have an ongoing thing there. We'll revisit PE only caps and legacy. We'll keep in the kind of back of our mind as to how to prevent that moving forward. So thank you.
Yay!
Woo-hoo!
Great job, guys. Really good job.
All right, let's see. Where are we? I know we're behind. Probably. It was great discussion. So worth it for sure. I'm not saying that. Oh, good. Okay, we are doing pretty well. So next item, well, to wrap up this conversation, we're hoping that at our next meeting in October, we'll be able to move forward with the revisions. So please get comfortable with what's there, or please come to the next meeting saying we really need to work on whatever. So we did say that we're pulling out the transit for more discussion, PE only, and study caps for more discussion. But otherwise, we're hoping we can take action to approve the revisions to the framework next meeting. Okay, item number 11, CVTA TAC member comments. Does anyone have any more comments? Chet?
Just one more item for the framework. We probably need to put a TBD on the deallocation part.
Oh,
Just to know
right.
that we're going to fill that in later because it's probably going to be another month or two
Or
till we have that
we
ready.
can say, you know, knowing once TAC adopts whatever, it'll just be in there. Okay. Anyone else have comments? Number 12, next meeting is October 7th at 1 o'clock. So mark your calendars. And we are adjourned. Great
Have a
job.
good day, guys. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks
you.
everyone for a good
Great work.
discussion.
Great job. Thank you.